2024, 7:30 a.m. Roll call by the chair, please.
Good morning. We will note that trustees Wilson, Evans, and Wabi are present physically, and trustee Watson and Nicholson are present online.
Approval of the committee meeting minutes, April 30th, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. You changed the screen on me there. I needed the screen to be back. I'm reading from the screen, guys.
The agenda. Please go to the agenda.
Yes, there are no comments by the chair. The internal audit, risk assessment and internal audit plan for fiscal year 2025, please.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I guess that's me, guys. So what we this morning we want to go over, I guess, as Mr. Watson mentioned, we're going to go over the risk assessment and internal audit plan for 2025. This does not require any action on your part, but if you guys have any comments or thoughts, suggestions, please speak up and let us know. I did reach out to everybody on the board, and we had some communications back and forth, so that was helpful. But we're going to go through it in this presentation. I'm not going to go through every page. Not every page is necessary for our purposes here, so just so you know that. So with that, let's open the slide. Go to slide 4, please. So very quickly, I just want to kind of go over the difference between the external auditors and the financial and the internal audit function. As you guys know, you guys kind of see two sets of auditors up here. You see myself on my team, and then you also see Clifton Larson. So Clifton Larson, their external auditors, their main focus is the financial statements and all the processes and controls around those. You know, they handle the audit of our 630 main audit package. You know, the main financial statements, which has a 630 year end. They also audit the benefit plans, which have a 1231 year end. So they're very concerned around the process and controls around the whatever affects the financial statements. We're not as concerned about that. We're more getting more in the weeds, look at more operational controls and processes. We're not as concerned about the financial statements because we know they're already looking at them. So we kind of don't want to duplicate efforts. So just kind of want to explain the differences. I think with the two approaches, we get good coverage with processes and controls and then financial statements. So any questions on that? Slide 5. Next few pages, I just want to go over the risk assessment methodology we use to develop our audit plan. As this slide moves left to right, you see the left is kind of the inputs, so to speak. You know, we'll review the events, circumstances affecting the district, anything changes, more construction, bond issuances, new systems, personnel changes, those types of things. Look at the prior engagements, the coverage and the trends. We hold discussions with the members of management, meet with my team. I did reach out to you guys. I also talk with the external auditors. We look at the strategic plan and financial statements. We kind of bring that all on a big stew, so to speak, and then identify the key areas and process areas, evaluate the risk, and from that we develop an audit plan. So move to slide 6. I think slide 6 explains it a little better. Kind of explains the mechanics of it. So basically we have a big spreadsheet that contains all the departments with their individual process areas under each division or department. You probably have 50 different areas on this spreadsheet. And when you basically assign points to each area every year, basically attributes, based on attributes and factors. We'll start with the overall inherent risk. Is it a key area? What are the risks in that particular area? We assign points based on that. What was the date of the last audit? The further away it was 5 years ago, that gets more points. Results of the last audit. Was it a clean audit? Did it have a lot of issues? If it had a lot of issues, we add more points. Any recent development factors, again, do we have more construction? We have new programs, do we have a new system, that kind of thing. We add points for that. Basically, we come up with a total at the bottom of the spreadsheet. It kind of gives our top 10 or 15 audits that we should be looking at every year. And we develop our plan from that. We'll also use this spreadsheet at 7. Just kind of gives you a visual of different areas we've hit over the years under the different departments. You can see we hit engineering a lot. Well, obviously, they have a lot of construction, a lot of dollars there. IT to the far right there, you can see we hit them a lot. Obviously, inherently, there's a lot of risk in IT, just in the landscape that we are currently operating in. Any questions? If you move to slide, let's go to slide 10. So the overall internal audit cycle, just kind of want to go over that to remind you guys how it works. So basically, it's a continuous cycle. We are always auditing. We audit, issue reports, issue recommendations. The process owners develop an action plan, a response to our recommendations, and they implement those changes. Then we come back around towards the end of the year and do some follow-up work and see what the status of those implementation efforts are and make sure they're following through. And we report that to you guys usually every December. Are there any questions? With that, let's move on to slide 12. And we'll go over the actual engagements. The first one is information governance. And technically, that's under Treasury. The information government manager reports to Tim, Treasurer. You're the treasurer. This is a brand new area. This actual program was initiated in 2017, and it's basically been in development since that time. And what we're talking about here is our efforts around our records. How we maintain records, how we organize them, how we protect them, how we dispose of them. We're basically digitizing everything at this point. So we're trying to make sure we have a good system for that. And that's what this is all about. So we're going to do this initial audit. We're going to look at the accounting division within the finance department. And actually the IG manager requested that we do some type of audit to kind of get this rolling and to help her kind of see how things are going. So we're going to do that. There are actually 4 district policies governing this area. So some of the risks here are that the records are not used and maintained in accordance with state laws and regulations. So that's one of the things we have to include in our policies. They're not properly retained and disposed of in a systematic manner. Personnel don't have appropriate access. They may have too much access. They may not have enough access. So obviously, there are certain records that are private. So we need to make sure that's happening. Any questions on that one? Next area is legal administration function. Last time we looked at it was 2019. As you guys know, Susan left, so we have a new general counsel, Todd Oshbacher. So that's not the reason for the audit, but we were due to this audit anyway. But hopefully this engagement will help Todd get a better grasp of what any improvements that may be needed. So hopefully this will be help to him. This is not a review of the procedures, approaches used to litigate. We're not going near that. We're not lawyers. This is really about the supportive administrative function around legal. We want to make sure that process and controls are effectively designed. The procedures for matter management and administration of those matters they are effective. And we're talking about how they receive the matters, how they sign the matters, how they monitor the processing of subpoenas, summons, make sure nothing falls through the cracks, that kind of thing. Also, we're going to look at the organization and retention of documentation. Again, that's very similar to the IG audit. So we're going to hit some of that here. Legal obviously has a lot of documents. We'll make sure that third-party service providers are in compliance with the provisions of their contract. They do have several third-party, legal firms that work with them, for them, so to speak. We want to make sure their software system that handles the matter management is working properly as well. So, any questions, guys? Next area will be payroll. That's under HR. So the last time we looked at this was in 2020. Obviously, this is a key business function. As you guys, I think, probably aware, we have a new payroll system in place now that was early in 24 that started excuse me. It includes a new timekeeping reporting module, along with a processing module, along with some other HR modules. The system is through a cloud servicing offering, so it is not on site or within our infrastructure. It is through a SaaS, which basically stands for Software as a Service. So the third party, so we basically have a new third-party service provider, and they provide and manage and maintain the system within their infrastructure. So we actually access the system through a web link. And they also assist with the payroll processing. Also, they handle tax reporting, tax collection. So there's another third-party service provider we got to look at here. So the risks are, first of all, non-compliance with the contract for the third party, and then obviously, procedures are not adequate performed, resulting in errors and inaccuracies in the payroll processing. Now, so overtime, we were looking at that right now, but we've delayed that and going to roll it into this payroll audit. We were having issues with the switchover in the system, so it's going to make more sense to roll it over into this new payroll audit. Whereas we're going to hit overtime really hard in this payroll audit. Any questions? Next area is claims administration. That is under legal now. Previously, it wasn't under HR. This relates to non-healthcare claims. So we're talking water backup, workman's comp, auto, general liability, et cetera. Last time we looked at this area was in 19. So the claims are processed by a third-party service provider. To remind you guys, the district's insurance program is a combination of self-insurance and commercial insurance. So we retain the risk up to a certain point, and then the risk is basically taken over by the commercial insurance. So the risk that we retain, we have to pay those claims and we have to process them. That's why we're a third-party service provider. So the risks here are either non-compliance with the general provisions of the contract, the claims are not processed properly and accurately or efficiently. We overfund. There has been times in previous audits where we've overfunded claims, so we want to make sure that's not happening. Any questions? Next item is an IT audit, tech and penetration. This is the audit that we do every year. This is where we have our ethical hackers attack the system. Basically, we have one hacker attempt to break into the system from the outside. Then we have another hacker who gets limited access from within the system, and that hacker tries to gain access to systems he shouldn't be able to get to. So we attack from both directions. See what we can just try to identify any weaknesses. And in fact, we're actually performing the planning for that this week. In fact, we have a meeting today for the audit for 24. Any questions? Next audit is security access review, application and database account management. And that's a lot of words. That's an IT audit as well. And basically the purpose of this audit is to make sure the access of the IT personnel to the various systems, databases, servers is proper. Make sure that's being properly controlled, properly administered. It aligns with their job duties. They don't have too much access. They don't have too many super users, so to speak. And I think it's really important, especially with the implementation of Fusion just recently, because things kind of shift around when we have implementation. So we want to make sure everything's okay. Next item is the review of the SOC reports. This is where we review all the SOC reports for the district. To remind you guys, what is a SOC report? It stands for Service Organization Control Report, and it's for a third-party service provider. As I just mentioned earlier, we have a payroll provider, we have our claims processing provider. They both have SOC reports, so we look at those. Basically, what they do, what the report is where an independent CPA performs an examination. It's basically an audit or the organization control structures. They focus the engagement specifically on the controls and processes that are relevant to the services being provided by the service organization to the user entity, which is us. So it's highly recommended, to our benefit, to look at these reports, identify any weaknesses, any issues with these third-party service providers, because they're delivering a service to us. We should know about those weaknesses. So, especially with moving a lot of stuff to the cloud and so forth, there's a lot more third-party service providers that we have here at the district. So this is important. Any questions? Okay, the last item is the review of the overhead rates. This is where we're looking at, basically this relates to the engineering consultants that we use, specifically construction management and design consultants, especially the way they bill us by the hour at a rate, but then they also charge us an overhead amount based on an overhead rate. So we want to make sure that rate is calculated properly and according to certain guidelines. So that's the purpose of this. We do this every year. We just monitor those throughout the year. Any questions on that? So slide 20, conclusion of the 24 plan. As always, we kind of start one plan and finishing up the other. We had a very large plan last year, so we're still finishing up. So the next 5-6 months, you'll see that happen. Service desks, next audit, you'll see that's being drafted and being finalized. Cloud secure, you'll see that one after that probably. And then we're also finalizing the call center for the billing and emergency contracts and call center operations. They're in the middle of the field work, and treasury we just started recently. So does anybody have any suggestions, questions, anything? I appreciate the time.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Next meeting, tentative date, July the 2nd, 2024, meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Nikozison. We will get things set up here and let you know when we're ready to start the program management meeting.
Okie dokie.
Trustee Nikozison, we're ready to begin when you are.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 255th meeting of the Program Management Committee. Can I get a roll call?
Yes, sir. We will note those trustees that are physically present and online. Thank you.
Approval of committee minutes, April 30th, 2024.
Move. Second.
Thank you. There are no comments by the chair. Engineering Department agenda items, June 13th, 2024. Rich?
Good morning, trustees. Thank you for being here today. First item for the agenda is a CSO volume reduction green infrastructure for Aspire Academy. This ordinance will authorize the district to enter into agreement with Fresh Coast Capital, doing business as Green Print Partners, to provide financial assistance through the Green Infrastructure Grant Program. The purpose of the project is to reduce combined sewer overflows to the Mississippi River per the long-term control plan and the consent decree. This particular project will reduce runoff with the installation of 3 bioretention basins 3 amended soil areas, and 1 rain barrel. The total cost of this project is estimated to be $957,104, and Fresh Coast Capital is requesting reimbursement for the full amount. In your packet, there's a map showing the location. This is in North St. Louis City, a large facility with some work being redone and parking facilities. The 3 large green spots are the new bioretention basins. And then in between the buildings there, they're going to amend the soils to accept more of the runoff from the roofs there. And then a single rain barrel. We didn't lose anybody there. Any questions on that particular grant?
Rich, what, there's a $5 million.
That's our annual appropriation. What we do is we appropriate the dollars for these grants all at once, rather than do individual appropriations, and then we'll bring the individual grants to you.
So this is 20%.
Correct. There's 3 different. We have the small grants programs that I bring that as a packet, and then we have annual, what we call annual call, where people apply for grants, which are usually some of the larger, and then we have the grants where somebody's doing redevelopment, and then we reimburse them as part of their redevelopment. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the next item is our annual appropriation for fiscal year 25 for infrastructure repair work on our wastewater system. This action will appropriate the annual funds for infrastructure repair, replacement, and construction projects. These are the projects that we bid through purchasing throughout the year. The work consists of repair or construction of manholes, sewers, or other infrastructure identified by operation and engineering department at various locations throughout the district. This work is part of our ongoing CMOM efforts with our operation department. That's basically our maintenance management program outlined in our consent decree. This appropriation of $8 million will continue the implementation as well as our small repair program. As projects are identified, we hire contractors through the purchasing division. We have an expedited process if the project's less than $50,000. That's our small repair. But we do have projects that are over $50,000. Those go through our normal bidding process. So the sanitary fund will again be used for that. I always like to kind of give some information on the previous fiscal year. So I've got the data on the small repair projects for the first half of last fiscal year. We had about 1.4 million worth of projects in the small contractor program. That would have been from July to December, or December 31st last year. 28% of that went to minority and women firms. Those dollars, 18 went to women-owned firms, 10% to minority-owned firms. And then as far as there were a total of 101 jobs with those dollars, and 23% went to WBE firms and 10% went to minority firms. The average cost is actually only about $14,000 for these small repairs. The program's still successful. Shauna reports on it with her annual report as well. So it remains successful. We try to bring more firms in and keep them working. So again, a good part of our minority and women business program. Any questions on that? All right, the next item was a project bid this past month. It's the GC06 Gravois Creek to Briarstone Sanitary Relief. This action will appropriate funds and authorize staff to enter a construction contract. The work to be done consists of the construction of approximately 4,400 lineal feet of sewers varying from 8 to 18 inches in diameter. The purpose of this project is to reduce building backups and relieve overcharged sanitary sewers. This project will eliminate a constructed SSO required by the consent decree. We received 5 bids on this project. The low bid was for Understall Contracting Company. The bid was just below our design estimate, and our appropriation, which includes utility relocation and contingencies, is slightly above our originally planned appropriation. Understall's contracting for minority and women, approximately 51%. This project has a significant amount of boring taking place, so you'll see a large percentage of the subcontracting work going to a woman-owned boring firm. So are there any questions on this particular project? All right. The next item is a OMCI grant reimbursement program in the Deer Creek watershed, OMCI, with the city of Rock Hill. The ordinance authorized the district to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Rock Hill for eligible stormwater expenditures where the revenue is collected in the Deer Creek OMCI. Eligible stormwater expenditures include storm sewer and inlet construction, drainage improvements, stream bank stabilization or erosion projects, cleaning under bridges or cleaning detention basins, stormwater planning or engineering, or other stormwater related expenditures. The city of Rock Hill, in this instance, is performing a stormwater master plan within their municipal boundaries. They are contracting for those services. Total cost of their project is $168,100. They're requesting reimbursement of $71,194, which is their portion of the Deer Creek OMCI. This is very beneficial when the municipalities do these studies because then they can provide that study to us and we can add projects. They can do projects that they want to do with grant funding, or it also provides us then that data to add those projects to our database for future projects potentially. Any questions? All right, one last item. This will be a resolution on next week's agenda. It authorizes the district to declare a surplus real property so the property can be conveyed to an interested party. We have a property located at 2800 Fanny Drive. It's actually in Arnold. It actually has a drop shaft. We treat the flow coming from the city of Arnold. It drops in Jefferson County and then it comes under the river and then goes to our Lower Merrimack plant. We have a drop shaft there. We had purchased the property one time due to odor control. The city of Arnold has reached out to us, and it's a fairly large parcel and has an interest in just utilizing this as a park. And we've been in discussions with them, but we can't move until the board declares it surplus. We will have an easement over the property, which allows us to get to our drop shaft. They will, obviously have to acknowledge that there is some odors from the drop shaft. So there's not an intent or anything that I'm aware of to develop it. They just want it as part of theirs, and thus it's actually works better for us than Brian and the operations crew won't have to maintain that piece of property once the city takes it over. So what you'll be doing with that resolution is basically authorizing us to proceed to negotiate with Arnold to take that property. All right, that's all on the agenda. I promise I'll have more next month.
I'm sure you will, Rich.
Short it was.
All right, there will be no other business. Next tentative meeting date, July 2nd, 2024. Can I get adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, everyone.
We're ready when you are.
That sounds good. Let's call order the 303rd meeting of the Finance Committee. The roll call by the chair.
Yes, sir, Trustee Evans. We will note for the record those trustees that are physically present and are online.
Get a motion to approve the committee meeting minutes of April 30th.
So moved. Second.
Next item is the quarterly pension.
Okay, I believe Mike Comstock with Aon has joined us. So Mike, we will turn it over to you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I see the screen up too. Fantastic. Hopefully everyone can see that or has it in front of them. But yeah, we're going to be looking at data here through the end of the first quarter, which is March 31st. And I think we're gonna be able to show you some good news here across the board. The pension plan had a nice return for the quarter, and your DC plan participants are probably pretty happy looking at their statements of late. And it looks like the slide that just rolled up here, slide 5, is a good way to get started and really set the stage for what the markets were providing. The one thing I'm going to say before talking about the numbers here is that as of 5/22, you can kind of just forget about that, because as we sit here today, where we are as of June 4th is pretty much where we were as of March 31st. Markets sort of ran up a little bit there in April and May, and have sort of given back some of those gains. So when you look at the 1 quarter return, 2024, you can think about that as the year-to-date return. Like I said, markets haven't really changed that much, but the first quarter was great, and that was on the heels of a really strong 2023. So when you look back over the last year or so, you're going to see some really strong performance for the vast majority of options. Some fixed income options are a little bit more muted, but as you can see on the page here, the equity return starting at the top with global stocks, and stocks everywhere around the world are up 7.7 in the first quarter and over 22% in the 1 year. U.S. large cap has definitely been the place to be. A lot of that is because of technology stocks here in the U.S., and they've been widely publicized as it relates to their earnings growth and how their PE ratios or valuations have expanded because of the optimism. And again, large cap stocks are up 10% in the quarter and 30% over the 1 year period. There's a fund in your DC lineup that's up 40% over the 1 year period. So I hope some of you on the line were holding that because that was a heck of a return. But just going down the page here, you can see U.S. small cap stocks, very favorable, 5% for the quarter, 20% for the 1 year. Non-U.S. is not as strong as the U.S. You can see developed and emerging markets at 5.8 and 2.4 respectively, but still pretty strong 1 year returns, especially for developed markets at 15%. Bonds, like I said, a little bit more muted. We did see interest rates move up a little bit in the first quarter, but these bonds now, these investment grade bonds, are yielding over 5%, similar to money market accounts right now. So there's a good amount of yield there to offset the decline in prices that comes with interest rate increases. And again, if you think back to 2022, what happened to bond returns? Well, they were significantly negative because A, there was no yield in these portfolios, and B, the Fed raised rates so quickly that the pricing pressure that these bonds felt was as strong as anything that we had seen in modern day history. So bond prices were very negative. But now that there's existing yield in these portfolios, they can absorb some of these interest rate movements. And for the last 1 year period for investment grade bonds, which again, we're just looking at a mix of US Treasuries, high quality corporate bonds, and mortgages. And again, your portfolios has exposure to these types of bonds. They're up almost 2% for the 1 year period. So again, a little bit of a different environment for bonds given the existing yield that exists, but again, still not immune to some erosion in price as it relates to yields moving up. Real estate, again, this has been an issue for all institutional investors that hold core real estate. We've been in the midst of a revaluation of real estate, and we've felt from the beginning that a 15 to 20% drawdown was going to be appropriate for expectations. You can see the real estate portfolio, or the core real estate here as an index, was down 12% over the 1 year. Our view is that we're mostly through the revaluation of real estate as an asset class. So hopefully going forward, we'll start to see some positive returns out of real estate. But again, the last year plus has been challenging. The next slide is just highlighting some of the issues that we see in markets. And again, what do higher rates mean for risk assets? So this is interesting. When we entered this year, the market was pricing roughly 6 to 7 rate cuts. And again, the view was inflation was coming down. You know, it was on track. The Fed's going to be able to ease up a little bit here and start to cut rates. And again, the Fed raised interest rates to try to curb inflation. And the way that they were going to do that is higher interest rates generally make spending more difficult. So less spending by consumers should have less pressure on prices. And again, inflation's the big factor of that. So the Fed's keeping rates high to try to get inflation low. We're getting some, at least last month was a decent inflation report, where the idea of the Fed cutting this year is still on the table. But again, big difference in expectations coming into the year versus where we sit now. The expectation is by the end of this year, we should have 1, maybe 2 rate cuts. And that's as long as inflation continues to come in, you know, the way it did this past month. We're kind of in a disinflation environment where inflation is still higher than what the Fed wants, but it's certainly come down off of the higher headline numbers that we saw over the last year and a half. Concerns grow over fiscal debt. Yeah, you don't have to look too far to see government spending is, you know, at very high levels. And that could cause interest rates as it relates to what the U.S. government has to pay on their debt to higher levels. That's sort of an unknown right now, but the fiscal policy is pretty loose, and you know it'll be interesting to see how bond markets react to that very thing. And then equities versus government bonds. We've had a lot of clients look at the equity risk premium, which is what you can expect to get out of equities versus what you can expect out of safe bond investments. And again, I mentioned that the investment grade bond universe is yielding 5%. Well, when you have an expected return of equities at roughly 7%, that equity risk premium, or the difference between the two, is a lot lower now than it was, you know, a couple of years ago when interest rates were near zero and equity expectations were somewhere between 6 and 7%. So that equity risk premium, the potential benefit that you get for taking on equity risk, is a lot lower now than it was. And again, that's causing some investors to rethink their asset allocation as a whole. And your pension plan is on the verge of an asset liability study, probably in the next 6 to 9 months, where we can revisit the liability structure versus your asset allocation, and then make some good decisions on how we posture the pension plan, at least on a go-forward basis. Okay, I'm going to move ahead to page 8, and we'll look at the pension plan performance. And again, we're looking at net of fee data here through 3/31, and the results are good. 3.7% net of fees for the first quarter. You did outpace the benchmark. That means that the active managers were able to add value, net of fees. And that one-year number is great. 12.1% net of fees, 160 basis points or 1.6 percentage points above the benchmark. So things have been pretty strong here of late. And again, you shouldn't be surprised to see favorable numbers, just given the previous page that I covered with showing market returns. You're obviously able to participate in some strong markets. Page 9 is just looking at the market value going back to the beginning of 2000. And we're looking at pretty significant growth in the pension from roughly 125 to $316 million as we sit here as of 3/31. Page 10 is looking at the pension plan's asset allocation versus the current policy targets or the approved policy weights. And again, you can see the policy targets in gray, the current asset allocation in red, and the difference is in that lighter gray. And again, mostly in line. The one exception is real estate. As you may know, the real estate portfolio is in drawdown. There was a relatively conservative real estate fund that, like many other real estate funds, had to put up liquidity gates, meaning they had to protect the existing investors in the fund or the fund itself in lieu of giving cash back to investors that wanted it. So the expectation was going to be a few years to get the money out of that fund. It is what I would say is a slow trickle. Monies are coming out of that fund. And again, this is one of the things that we'd want to revisit is the go forward asset allocation for real estate. But again, an asset liability study would help frame things and put things in perspective to determine, if 12% is the right number on a go-forward basis. And then if 12% is the right number, how do we fill that bucket, knowing that we're redeeming money out of the current manager? How do we build that going forward for success for the pension?
What is the expected time for the drawdown of the real estate investment allocation?
I think at this point, you can expect the last dollars coming out within the next 2 years. But that's certainly something, and again, there's a lot of clients that have this situation where there's ways to manage through that, knowing what the expected flows are from this strategy and sort of timing those with additional flows, building up that real estate allocation.
And what's the expected time that there would be the discussion over what the new proper allocation percentage for real estate should be?
So you all are going through an RFP process, which we would think would be wrapped up in the next 3 months or so. And again, we've talked to Tim a lot about this. An asset liability study is the next step. So, if we're fortunate enough to continue to work with you, that would be the first thing that we would want to do is an asset liability study. Get your feedback on what the real estate allocation should be through our guidance. And if 12% is approved, then we can start putting money to work in this space very quickly. There are a lot of core real estate funds that have open doors for money. It's just a matter of reaffirming the policy targets. And that's something that, again, is being deferred until the RFP process is completed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, next slide, page 11. We're looking at greater detail here of performance, and again, still through 3/31. The pension plan as a whole, you've seen these numbers on the previous page there in that aqua colored, net of fees. And then we break it down by different asset classes. So you can get a sense of what your domestic equity portfolio has done in aggregate. And that's broken out between US large cap and US small cap. And the returns are shown. The numbers in parentheses are ranks. So how do your specific asset classes, how do your specific managers line up against like peers? So your small cap equity as it relates to the 22.4% ranks in the 54th percentile or middle of the pack relative to other institutional small cap equity portfolios. And then the same can be said for the managers. So Kennedy mid cap value as an example, really good 1 year return, 31.6% net of fees. That ranks in the top 19 percentile of other mid-cap value funds in that universe. So again, lower numbers are better, but that's a little bit of explanation around the ranks. If you're wondering why the pension plan ranks don't look as good relative to other pension plans, a lot of that has to do with how good your plan looks, frankly, from a funded ratio standpoint, and the asset allocation that was deemed appropriate on a go-forward basis. So your asset allocation is 35% fixed income, which is relatively conservative and certainly relative to other pension funds that have different goals. Their asset allocations are more, call it 80-20. So the risk on relative to you all over the last handful of years when equity markets were strong is the primary reason why you're lagging your peers. So again, it's expected. In a difficult environment, your pension plan would look relatively good. But in a risk-on environment, given the asset allocation, your pension plan is lagging a little bit. Okay, and then on the bottom of the page, we're just showing the two non-US equity managers managed by Morgan Stanley. One's a developed market and one is an emerging market strategy. Page 12 is looking at the fixed income portfolio. And again, the first quarter return there of -1, we've already talked about what fixed income generally was doing as it relates to the opportunity set. Somewhat of a difficult environment, again, with rates moving up. But again, there was enough yield in these portfolios to sort of cushion the blow to an extent. You can see your two US bond managers were roughly flat, while your global diversified bond fund fell 4.7% for the most recent quarter. And then you can see to the right some longer term data here. And then there's that real estate portfolio, that UBS Trumbull Property Fund. Again, it is being drawn down. That 18 million is expected to continue to come down. But here you can see the performance. And again, over the last 1 year, a little better than the benchmark, but still nobody wants to see a negative 11% return from anything in their portfolio. But again, real estate as a whole has gone through a significant repricing, and that's being reflected here in this portfolio as well. What other questions do you all have on the pension or anything market related? I'm going to shift gears to the DC if I don't hear any.
What's the current funding status of the DB plan?
Tim, do you by chance have that number off the top of your head? I want to say we're in the 90s.
From an actuarial standpoint, we just got the actuarial report just in the last few days, or in the last week, I think. It's about 85%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so again, that stacks up pretty well relative to a lot of other public pension plans. And again, given your current status related to how the plan is structured for new participants, in that a lot of other pension plans have sort of that open, ongoing, longer duration, longer expected life of new entrants. It calls for a more aggressive profile. So that again is why the asset allocation was set the way that it was. Page 13 is looking at DC plan, asset allocation. And again, there's two different plans here, the defined contribution and the deferred compensation plan. And on the right-hand side toward the bottom of page 13, you can see in aggregate, we're at $132 million in assets. And you can see how it's spread across these different tiers. We'll walk through those in a second. But again, this is just a look at from the end of 2023 to the current quarter, how do things sit? And again, pretty much the same split between the two different plan types. But again, some nice asset growth here to $132 million. Page 14 is looking at, again, the tiering. Tier 1 are target date funds. And again, this is where we think the vast majority of participants in DC plans should be allocating their assets. These are professionally managed funds that get more conservative over time. And again, as a new entrant, let's say I have an expected retirement date in, say, 30 years. Well, it'd be appropriate for me to invest my assets in the target date retirement 2055 fund. Just lining up my age with my expected retirement date, that feels right to me. So participants would invest their assets in that fund. And it would start off aggressive. It would be roughly 90% equity, 10% fixed income. But over time, through nothing that the participant has to do, these portfolios get more conservative. And they ultimately roll down the glide path. Whereas when you're sitting in a 2025 fund with the idea of I'm hoping to retire next year, well, that asset allocation is probably 30% equities and 70% fixed income. So again, over the course of the life of these funds, they get more conservative, which is generally appropriate for most investors. You want to be more aggressive in your early days and less aggressive as you start to approach retirement to hopefully preserve that corpus that you've built. So again, these are good funds. They're low cost, they're passive, and they are broadly diversified across equities and fixed income markets. And the returns for the most recent quarter were strong. Again, the more aggressive equity-centric funds are up 7% or close to it, while the more conservative funds that have more fixed income heavy exposures are up anywhere from, call it, 2 to 3%. And you can see that reflected. And then the 1 year number, again, one of the reasons I think participants are happy you're going to see this is that these 1 year returns, especially for the equity-centric funds, are really strong at over 20% net of fees. Any questions on the target date funds? Okay, let's keep going. Tier 2 and Tier 3, and these are split by passive and active. So you all have given your participants the ability to create their own portfolios. If they don't want to do a target date fund, there's other options for them. One is, again, within Tier 2, if they wanted to make a portfolio of low-cost index funds, but wanted to control the weights in a way different than what the target date funds would represent, your participants have the ability to do it. They can do it through the U.S. large cap, which is the S&P 500. They can get mid-cap stock exposure. They can get small-cap stock exposure. They can get bond exposure. And then there's also a balanced index fund, which is really just like a 70-30 portfolio of equities and bonds. And that allocation doesn't change. And again, the results here are in line with expectations. Again, these are index funds, so they're tracking their market indices, and the market indice is ultimately the opportunity set. So again, Vanguard does a nice job of doing this at a very low cost. And then tier 3, these are for participants that don't mind paying active management fees. They still want to build their own portfolios or at least influence the composition, and they can do so through different strategies. They can do it through U.S. Stocks, through the Windsor Fund or the U.S. Growth Fund. They can do this through an international strategy managed by Vanguard, or if they want, they can have a cash buffer, the Cash Reserve Money Market Fund. And then finally, the last thing on the page is the Retirement Savings Fund, which is it's a stable value fund, which is capital preservation. So you offer both those last two, the cash fund and the stable value fund. Now, long term, we like stable value. We think that should out earn money markets. But given how quickly the Fed raised rates and sort of what happens with money market funds, very short duration, the yields reset very quickly. Participants can capture those higher rates in real time, whereas a stable value fund, it has a little bit of a different dynamic where any losses in a bond portfolio, and there were definitely some, think back to 2022 when bonds fell significantly, those losses need to be amortized over the duration of the fund, which is roughly 3.5 years. So participants don't really feel higher interest rates as quickly in the crediting rate for the stable value fund, but it slowly catches up. And again, for the long term, the types of bonds that a stable value fund is able to hold, a little bit lower credit quality, a little bit longer in duration, those provide for greater yield, which is why we think that a stable value fund is a better long-term placeholder for assets than money market for those participants that want a conservative portfolio. But there is that near-term phenomenon that's taken place with rates up so quickly that money market looks a little better over the last year or so. Okay, page 16, we're going to look at fees. And again, this is really important to make sure that fees are reasonable for what we're getting. You don't need to be the lowest. Again, we're trying to think of fiduciary protection here and making sure that we're analyzing fees. Fees don't need to be the lowest, they just need to be reasonable. And you can see here, we're pretty much in line on page 16, the fund expense ratio with the institutional peer comparison, meaning high quality peers, different strategies. What is the median fee for those and how do we stack up? And again, for the most part, we're below the median fee that we see. There are two strategies that are slightly above it, but again, not far off from the median. In particular, one of them, we're comfortable with the fees. But again, it's important to keep an eye on this and just make sure that, like I said, fees that are being paid are reasonable relative to high quality peer universe. And on page 17, I think it's even a better story here as it relates to fees. We have the fund expense ratios for all the DC plan options sort of in the middle of the page. And then to the right, you can see what those peer groups are and what the fees are. And your fees are very low. Again, like I said, Vanguard does a good job of keeping fees low for what it is that they do across their suite of funds. So it isn't just the passive funds that offer low cost, it's their active funds too. And you can see that relative to the universe median, just how much lower the fees are for the DC plan options relative to other high quality institutional options. I'm going to stop there. Are there any additional questions? Tim, I think that wraps up my prepared remarks, but I'm happy to go down and answer any questions that anyone might have.
All right, there doesn't appear to be any questions.
Okay, well, fantastic.
All right, trustees, so that concludes this particular item. I actually have the next three items on the agenda, and then Tim will cover the portfolio review. So I'll go ahead and get started with the Adjustment Review Committee report. As required by the wastewater ordinance, I am presenting this report. This report covers the quarter from January of 2024 through March of 2024. So during the quarter, we had a grand total of approximately $310,200 of adjustments and write-offs. There were 38 transactions that consist of this total. The bulk of the amount consists of the adjustments at the top of the page. There were 33 adjustments, totaling approximately $274,500. And as usual, the bulk of these adjustments consist of entries that we get from the water utilities. We get, in order for us to bill, all of our data basically comes from the water providers. And so when they have corrections, we get those corrections and make the appropriate adjustments. And so you'll see, for instance, water off adjustments. These are accounts in which we were notified that the water was turned off, made adjustments. There were 10 of those, totaling approximately $90,000. There were also water agency adjustments, 11 of those, of approximately $67,000. Again, these are adjusted reads that we receive. There could be an issue with the meter, and the water utility will go back and reread that meter and send us the corrected information. And then you have, sure.
This water off, $90,000. There's 10 accounts. These are 9,000 on average, 9,000.
Yeah, and believe it or not, that's not uncommon. What typically will happen is, in some cases, the water providers don't necessarily turn off the account. And so that customer may move out or leave the home vacant and not notify the utilities. And so the water providers will notice either that they're getting zero reads, or finally that customer calls in if they're being pursued for collections and notifies them that the house is vacant, and they will go back and adjust their water off dates.
So these could be years.
Yes, it could be years before that correction is made.
Residential or commercial?
They're primarily residential.
Okay.
And most of them are unmetered accounts, so they're city accounts. So in those particular instances, it's difficult for city water in some cases to tell because there's no meter consumption. So they're relying on that customer to contact them. I had the same question when I initially started here and saw this particular report.
Minds think alike.
I'm sorry?
Great minds think alike.
Okay, so in the write-off section, we had 5 write-offs that from sheriff sales and LRA property that was turned over to LRA. Those totaled approximately $36,000. So I'll move to the bottom of the page, the other section. These are actually billings to these entities. So we billed Bridgeton Landfill $30,000 for wastewater treatment for them. We also billed Missouri American Water approximately $695,000 for their share of costs at the Lower Merrimack treatment plant. So that concludes my comments regarding this report. Are there any questions?
One quick question, are these numbers consistent with what we had anticipated?
Well, we don't really budget for these particular types of transactions because it's difficult, to be honest with you, to do. We do budget for estimated write-offs, and right now we're targeting, or we're forecasted to be below budget for the fiscal year.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, if there are no other questions, I will move on to the next item, which is the Finance Key Performance Indicator Report. This report is as of April the 30th of 2024. So I'll start with the top right-hand graph, which shows projected FY24 user charges, our forecast for that. So for our commercial customer base, we're projecting revenues to be about $8.2 million above budget. And for our residential customers, we are projecting or forecasting revenues to be $1.8 million above budget for a total variance of $10.0 million favorable. That budget variance that's listed there in the lower left-hand side of that graph is actually incorrect. It says $8.3 million favorable. It should be $10 million favorable. I apologize for that error. So moving over to our budget forecast for expenditures in the top left-hand portion of the chart. Overall, this is showing a budget variance of $75 million unfavorable. And I believe I've explained this previously. The reason for that is for the incinerator project, we budgeted $100 million roughly in FY23. We didn't appropriate those funds until FY24. So you got a mismatch between when we actually budgeted and when the appropriation came to the board. So it's skewing those numbers. Also, if you look at our debt service projected amount versus forecast, or I'm sorry, budget versus forecast, that's showing a $25 million unfavorable variance. That's a little bit misleading because $25 million of that relates to the refunding that Tim recently brought in. It's a tender offer in which we repurchase bonds. We don't budget for refunding. So what happens is when we have to pay that expense, it shows up as an unbudgeted expense. But we also have on the flip side of that, the revenue that we received to pay off the bonds from the bond issue, that is also unbudgeted. So the two things really kind of net themselves out. So our debt service, if you take out that refunding, we would be right at budget of $139.4 million. For the operating budget, we're about $9.9 million in terms of the forecast below our expected budget. So that's favorable as well. Okay, moving down to the lower left-hand chart, which shows the FY24 debt coverage ratios. As you can see by the graphs there, our forecasted senior ratios are exceeding our rate proposal ratios, and we're also exceeding the targets that we have set as well. The same thing for our all-in debt, which is our senior debt plus our subordinated debt. We are exceeding, or projected to exceed, both the required targets in our bond covenants, as well as what was in the rate proposal. And finally, the last graph on the chart in the lower right-hand corner shows our total delinquencies and our average collection period. Our average collection period has really been kind of consistent over the past several years. We're about anywhere from 55 to 57 days. And for FY24, our average collection period is about 57 days. So are there any questions that I can answer regarding the report?
Are you concerned about the increase over time in the election period? It seems it's increased pretty substantially last 10 years. If I'm not reading that.
Are you looking at the, just to make sure I'm looking
that
at the
FY16 election, that amount? Maybe I'm misreading this.
Are you looking at the bar chart?
Yeah.
Okay, so that bar chart actually shows the total delinquencies from FY16. So that grows each year. And actually, this goes back, it's what shows FY16. This is a cumulative total from since the district was formed back in 1954. So on average right now, we budget for about anywhere from $4 million to $5 million of write-offs over a particular year. And that's about 1 to 1.5% of revenues. For us, that amount is a little bit higher than you would find for other utilities that have the ability to turn off service.
Right.
But I'm not overly concerned about it because it's within our budget parameters.
Okay. Okay.
All right, any more questions? Okay. I have one other quick item. Just wanted to update you on a change to the wastewater ordinance. So in the preliminary wastewater ordinance that you received, it showed an amount for BOD in FY28 on a per ton basis as $1,238.73. There was a number that was transposed. That number should have been $1,283. The ad that we published for the public hearing contained the correct information. It was just that preliminary ordinance had an incorrect amount in it. So we've corrected that. And so, again, I apologize for that error, but it has been corrected in the ordinance that you'll see next week. And that concludes all the items that I have on the agenda. I believe Tim is on, and he will cover the portfolio review.
All right, thanks, Barry. I've got just the one item, monthly portfolio review. There's some changes this month that bear pointing out. So I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner with the summary statistics. Our par amount is down about 55 million from last month. That's because at the beginning of May, we had our semi-annual interest and principal payments on senior debt. So that was a large outflow. And we had investments lined up to mature to match those. Those investments had been out there for a couple of years, were set when rates were lower. So everything that matured this month averaged about 2.7%, and the new investments we made this month were about 5.3%. So we saw a nice spike in our yield to maturity of our portfolio. It jumped about a little over 30 basis points. So our portfolio now has a yield of about 3.5. Still trails the benchmark, which dropped just a little bit this month, but that whole benchmark turns over every month. And so short-term rates have stayed high. There were expectations the Fed would be lowering rates this year. That keeps getting pushed off. Economy's been strong enough that they have been reluctant to decrease rates so far. But we made a nice little jump here in May. Not a big change in our weighted average maturity. We went up just a few points. Benchmark went down about 10 points. But not huge moves there. Moving over to the sector allocation, we saw a little bit of an increase in the commercial paper. It took away from agencies, but just a couple points there. So that's really on the margins, nothing exciting. Down in the fund summary in the bottom left, all of that 55 million came out of pretty much out of the operations. So that one is down a little over 50 million. And then maturity distribution, this is just our comparison to our portfolio in the benchmark, because there are different maturities in each portfolio. Not big changes on our side. The portfolio moved a little bit shorter, so maybe about 3 points moved from the 1 to 2 year to the 0 to 1. But that one tends to fluctuate more than ours does. So that's an update on where we are on the investments. Any questions? All right, if not, I'm on mute for the rest of the morning. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tim. Trustee Evans, I believe that concludes all the items on the Finance Committee agenda.
Thank you. Next tentative meeting date is July 2nd. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Get a second?
Oh, second.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Ready when you are.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the June 2024 Stakeholder Relations Committee meeting. Can I get a roll call, please?
Thank you, Trustee Wilson. We will note for the record those trustees that are physically present and are online.
Thank you. I have no comment, so can I get a motion to approve the April 30th meeting.
So move.
Second.
Okay, with no objections, the minutes are approved. Moving right along, Counselor, I think the next item is yours. Good morning.
Good morning, trustees. I am here this morning to present to you resolution number 3906 for your consideration at the next board meeting. By this resolution, the board will authorize Brett Berthold as the new executive director to sign official documents with EPA and MDNR as required by Missouri law and the regulations surrounding these documents for the period beginning July 1st, 2024. Brian, of course, will be replacing Brian Holscher as the authorized signatory on behalf of MSD. Wanted to let you know that this resolution is identical to the one that Susan Myers presented back in February as she was retiring to replace herself with me as an authorized alternate signatory. Otherwise, signatory authority will now have Brett as the official and Tim Snoke and myself as the alternative. So that will be presented to you at the next board meeting. Unless anyone has any questions, that's all I have this morning.
What will you be doing this left-handed?
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is, Mr. President, you and the assistant from,
Yes, Dino Kivrich is going to cover the classification plan ordinance, and I'm going to cover the compensation plan ordinance. So Dino.
thank you.
Thank
You have
you.
it.
Good morning, trustees. I'm here to go over the first ordinance, number 16403, and this is the introduction and adoption of our classification plan changes. We made some corrections to some of the typos due to the layout of the ordinance, and also introduced some new job titles and grade changes. So on the bottom of the sheet, you can see we have new positions that we're introducing that were approved by the Civil Service Commission. First one is in engineering, senior right-of-way agent, C7. And in HR, we have the new position that we are introducing, adopting HR business partner, C6. Some of the great changes that took place, collection system technician trainee 1, 2, and 3. Collection system technician trainee 1, we usually call it CSDT 1, is going from 5 to 6, 2, 6 to 7, and 3, 7 to 8. On top of that, we have 2 that are not listed. Sheet, SCADA administrator supervisor, going from C8 to C7 due to changes of qualifications and job duties. And then a construction inspector senior from A11 to A12, study and negotiations that we just completed with some of the unions. With that being said, that's all for the classification plan. Any
Thank you.
questions?
Mr. President?
Thank you, Trustee Wilson. I'm here to speak to the introduction and adoption of ordinance number 16404. This will adjust our compensation plan and detail salary increases for a number of all of our employees. It doesn't cover everyone right now. Currently, we have 3 bargaining units. We've been negotiating with them since December. We've come to agreement with 2 out of the 3 bargaining units, and they have ratified their contracts. And so I will walk through their salary increases for the contracts that we agreed to, and I'm also going to cover the increases for the C and U schedule employees. At the bottom of the page, you'll see. This covers fiscal years 2025 through 2028. With our bargaining units, we have traditionally had 4-year contracts. So those contracts run from July 1st of 2024 through June 30th of 2028. The first group that I'll cover is our C and U schedule. These are our the professional, the engineers, the the unclassified employees. And for years 2025 through 2026, the salary ranges will move 4% in 2025, 3% in 2026, 3% in fiscal year 2027, and 2.5% in fiscal year 2028. I want to point out that those are the ranges that are moving in our compensation plan. We do have a raise pool for the C&U schedule employees that is a little higher because the way the pay ranges are set up, first quartile employees are eligible for a little bit larger raise. Then you move up second, third, and finally the fourth quartile, which are the higher paid employees, have a smaller raise pool. But for C&U schedule, the raise pool will be 5%, 4%, 4%, and 3.5% for fiscal years 25 through 28. For BT schedule covers one bargaining unit, but it's 4 unions. It's our bricklayers, our electricians, our fleet mechanics, and our heavy equipment operators. We reached agreement with them, and for the 4 fiscal years covered, it will be 5% increase in fiscal year 25, 4% for fiscal years 26 and 27, and 3.5% for fiscal year FY 28. Our final group will be the A and B schedule employees covered by our AFSCME bargaining unit. We have reached agreement with them, and they have ratified their contract to have increases starting in FY 25 of 5.5%, FY 26 and 27 of 4%, and FY 28 of 3%. We are still working to come to agreement with our final bargaining unit, which is the SEIU bargaining unit. We continue to meet with them and get closer. What will happen is we'll have to come back and amend this ordinance once we reach agreement with them and they ratify their contract. I want to point out that, yeah, there it is. The rate increases that you see here are in line with what was proposed and included in our rate proposal. So we're a little bit higher than what was pointed out there by about 1%. But through negotiations and what's been going on, we feel that what we've agreed to here with our bargaining units and what we're doing for our C&U schedule employees are certainly right in line with what our budget will support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That's the last item on the agenda. Does anyone have anything for the good of the body? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. With no objection, and the pleasure of my life, and the meeting is adjourned.